Hey, welcome to a new video. I'm going to show you step by step how to sculpt this rug in Blender. We will start completely from scratch and go through the full sculpting process. This sculpting workflow works great for both stylish and realistic looks. It all depends on how you decide to shape and detail it. Let's get started. I'm going to start with a simple blockout. I just want to get a basic shape to understand the form of the rock. You can skip this and go straight into sculpting if you want, but I like to block things out first. It helps me see the shape better and gives me more control later when I add details. At this point, I'm not thinking about small details, just the big shapes. Now I'm using the bisect tool. I have set it to a shortcut on my mouse for easy access. This tool helps me cut the rug at angles so I can control the shape better. It's a quick way to make the base more interesting and easier to refine later. Now, we need to cut the base of the rock in a way that feels natural. With the bisect tool, try to keep the cuts in a direction that works for the shape you want to create. You can make the cuts at different angles to give the rock a sharp, pointy look or more rounded depending on the style you're aiming for. And the key is to experiment and find the right direction for your shape. You can watch some reference on Pinterest to get a good idea first. Once the blockout is done, we can start shaping the rock more easily using proportional editing. This tool lets us deform the wall shape smoothly instead of just moving a small part. It's not an essential step, but it can be really useful to refine the overall form before we start detailing the sculpting. Just turn on proportional editing with the O key and adjust the size of the area you want to affect. At this point, I apply the scale to all the blockout pieces first, and then I add a remesh modifier to each rock. I set the octave depth to around 8 or 9 and sometimes even 10, depending on the size of the rock. And the larger the rock, the higher the density of the mesh. This will give us enough geometry to sculpt in detail later. Always keep an eye on the total triangle count, and in this case I'm working with around 50 million triangles on the screen, but we need to control that number by adjusting the remesh level based on your PC's capabilities. A high value like this is fine because I'm sculpting each rock separately with much fewer triangles, but if we are sculpting the entire rock with 50 million polygons, that would be a different story and it could slow down your PC. So be sure to adjust the remesh and depth to find a balance between detail and performance first. Now comes the most important part, the sculpting. I start by selecting just one rock and begin adding details using the scrape brush from the free All Brushes pack. You can find the link to download it in the description below. You can use the default scrape brush, just adjust its settings. It is very similar. I like this brush because it helps to add a nice and natural details to the surface. I also switch between rocks using Alt Q to keep working on each one separately. Do the same process to all of the rocks. Next, I'll start adding extra details to the rocks. For this, I'm using one of the brushes from my personal brush pack, which will also be available in the description below. If you don't have my pack, you can still achieve a similar result, but it will take you a bit more time. You can use a mask and then the craft brush to add those details. However, I want you all to be able to follow along these tutorials, so even if you don't have my full brush pack, I will leave you a free demo version of my brushes in the description, so this way you can comfortably follow this tutorial. If you want to support my content, you can get the pack later. To break up the monotony of the sculpting, I decided to add similar details with this brush, but in a more aggressive way. This adds a bit of variation and makes the rocks feel more dynamic. I also focus on keeping a certain continuity between all the rocks so they flow together. And by doing this, we get a more interesting and less flat overall view of the rocks. You can also add more details at this point. If you want to go for a more realistic style, you can include small cracks and micro details. This can be done by hand or with detailing brushes, and you can also increase the level of detail later during texturing. But if you prefer a more stylized look, you can keep it like this or even with less detail. It depends on the final look you are going for. To finish up, I join all the objects into one using the join tool. This gives me a single mesh, which is easier to work with, and after that I apply another remesh to clean up the inside geometry that we don't see. It helps to keep the model clean and optimized, especially if you are going to use it in a game or bake textures later. Of course, this is the high poly, so after this we need to make the low poly, but that's for another video. Finally, I go over the entire rock and refine some general details. I also fix any visible mistakes or areas that feel off. This final pass helps to clean up the sculpture and make it feel more polished and complete. To finish this high poly rock, which we will use later to bake onto a simple mesh or low poly one, we need to reduce the triangle count so it will be easier to work with. I use the decimate modifier for this. First I set it to 0.35 and then apply it. Then I apply another decimate modifier with a value of 0.5. This brings the total triangle down by half without affecting the overall detail too much. It is important to note that once we do this, we can't really go back to sculpting because the mesh has been simplified. Of course, save a bucket for this. Also keep in mind that decimating takes time, so in my case, each level took around 3 to 5 minutes to complete, so be patient. And here's the final result. I really hope you enjoyed the process and learned something new. Remember, there are many ways you can support my channel, leaving a comment, a like, or subscribing if you want. You can also join the channel, leave a super thanks, or check out some of my products. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.